Hello everyone, my name is Amit Rowell. It is a pleasure today to present to you the study How Do Entrepreneurs Bounce Back from Bankruptcy? A review of literature and a research agenda. The paper was primarily written by myself alongside Dr. David Sarpong. To introduce the topic, venture failure can end in bankruptcy, yet there is not a significant amount of literature on entrepreneurial failure that has entered in bankruptcy, and they are largely treated in isolation. Existing literature has highlighted that entrepreneurs have found the bankruptcy experience significantly traumatizing, facing phobias and depression alongside social stigma, which can then go on to hinder their learning from their bankruptcy and failure. Yet we still know very little about the processes and context within which bankrupted entrepreneurs may bounce back and restart a firm. And furthermore, several prior studies are based on inconsistent findings, specifically around whether entrepreneurs truly learn from their failure. We endeavour to identify, synthesize, and analyze insights from relevant multiple streams on the antecedents of the venture collapse that ends in bankruptcy, the experiences and coping of the business owner's failure and bankruptcy, as well as the entrepreneur's comeback post their bankruptcy. This allows us to paint a picture of how entrepreneurs can bounce back from bankruptcy and create a framework on the matter. Second, we aim to propose an agenda for future studies using this developed framework. To explore these research objectives, we have two key research questions. The first, how do once bankrupted entrepreneurs restart a firm? The second, what are the implications for further studies as guided by our findings? For our literature review, we undertook a multi-stage methodology. The first part involved identifying key terms. So after an initial search, we applied suitable key terms on various online databases. This included JSTOR, ScienceDirect, and Wiley Online Library. Examples of our suitable search criteria entail entrepreneurial failure and bankruptcy, learning from entrepreneurial failure, and entrepreneurial bankruptcy and coping, amongst others. We do not constrain our search to a set time period or to specific journals. Our initial systematic search returned over 1,121 papers. The second key step of our multi-stage methodology entails enforcing exclusion criteria. We specifically excluded publications that, number one, looked at new venture formation but did not have any reference to entrepreneurial failure. The article did not include any participants whose failure led to bankruptcy. And number three, the paper focused on an organizational project failure instead of actual entrepreneurial failure. And lastly, the publication did not investigate failure and bankruptcy, but solely determination of a firm due to other reasons. Following this, we sifted through the remaining publications by ensuring that they discussed the causes, experiences, and recovery of the entrepreneurial venture failure and bankruptcy from the lens of the business owner. We arrived at a total of 58 publications when we also included 7 other publications that we found as part of the grey literature on entrepreneurial failure that ended in bankruptcy. As you can see from the figure on the slide, our selected literature is from a range of journals. However, the main articles are from key entrepreneurial related journals such as Entrepreneurship Theory and Practice, Journal of Business Venturing, and the Journal of Small Business Management, amongst others. The last step of our multi-stage methodology entailed undertaking a narrative synthesis approach. What is a narrative synthesis approach? It is an appropriate way to formulate a story and delve into a wide range of literatures by following the core principles of a systematic review. These entail organization, transparency, and replicability. We specifically undertook a narrative synthesis approach by capturing all the applicable publications that highlight the differing strands of entrepreneurial failure and bankruptcy by grouping them together to paint a more comprehensive picture. And we did so by categorizing the articles based on the core conceptual theme they focus on, as well as eventually forming an analytical framework that comprised the overarching analytical themes and sub-themes that represent how the research all fits together. And this formed the basis of our review. Our analytical framework is displayed on this slide. As you can see, there are several sub-themes that lead to the key analytical themes. These entail, number one, the antecedents of entrepreneurial failure and bankruptcy. Number two, their experiences, implications, and recovery from entrepreneurial failure and bankruptcy. And number three, the learning, opportunity identification, and restart post-bankruptcy. The results of our first theme on the antecedents of entrepreneurial venture failure and bankruptcy showed that a combination of factors, both internal related to the firm as well as external factors, led to entrepreneurial failure and bankruptcy. Now, we found that only 2 of the 7 selected studies on the matter use a qualitative methodology, whilst the remaining 5 are based on reviews or make use of quantitative approaches. And although they provide useful insights, they do not explore in depth how entrepreneurs were able to deal with their causes and lack that rigor that they need to really shed light on the firm owners' perspectives. The findings from our second theme that focused on the experiences, implications, and recovery from entrepreneurial venture failure and bankruptcy can be split into 2 key parts. The researchers highlighted that both negative and positive experiences exist for the business owner. The negative experiences entailed social stigma and disgrace, whilst the positive aspects of the failure included experiencing relief. Interestingly, it could be a range of minority factors that could explain why the once bankrupted entrepreneurs face these distinct experiences, such as cultural attitudes, the entrepreneur's sexuality, and the influence of the media. Yet, irrespective of these contributing factors, it is evident there are 2 overall views of the experiences that previously bankrupted business owners face, and it is not conclusive. The second part of our second theme results showed that the entrepreneurs undertook a range of coping techniques. We also found that there was a range of empirical and conceptual studies that have uncovered how the firm owners dealt with the entrepreneurial failure and bankruptcy. And they shed light on the multifaceted recovery processes embedded. These processes encapsulated making sense of the business failure, emotionally regulating and self-reflecting, in combination with undertaking a range of problem-solving and emotionally based strategies, as well as appraising the business failure and bankruptcy and managing aspects of the stigma. Despite these contributions, we found that not many scholarly works have examined how bankrupted business owners use specific coping strategies to deal with differing aspects of the entrepreneurial venture failure and bankruptcy. And there are also several contradictions around whether firm owners truly have a recovery period following their failure. It would be incredibly useful to garner further insights between how bankrupted business owners cope and the resilience that they display to shed light on the matter further. Our third theme focused on learning, opportunity identification and restart, and revealed that there are 32 publications precisely focused on the matter. These can be split into three subcategories. The first focused on the entrepreneur's learning capacity and the processes of entrepreneurial restart. The second on their emotional capabilities in relation to their learning. And finally, grief linked to their learning. We found that a deeper understanding of the relationship between coping and learning is required. The limiting evidence on the matter between the two is concerning given the importance in the recovery and restart process. More work is also required to examine the relationship between how one attributes their failure that ended in bankruptcy and their coping and learning. Furthermore, from a methodological perspective, researchers have primarily relied on quantitative data and retrospective surveys with failed entrepreneurs, and these are dependent on their memory, which may not always be accurate. And finally, despite learning and cognitive related theories underpinning the research on the learning processes post-entrepreneurial venture failure and bankruptcy, there is still much to be learned about the matter itself, and they have not been able to explain the range of learning experiences. From building on our findings, we were able to formulate an integrative framework which showcases the key aspects of the literature and how the entrepreneurs were able to bounce back from bankruptcy. As can be seen from the very left-hand side of the image, the antecedents of entrepreneurial failure and bankruptcy impact the experiences of bankruptcy and their eventual outcomes. The outcomes are also influenced through the minority factors that we mentioned, such as emotional capabilities, financial policies, cultural factors, alongside the entrepreneur's sexuality. Building on our research findings from our literature review and our framework, we have identified several areas to investigate further. And the first recommendation for scholars is to focus on the antecedents of entrepreneurial venture failure that ends in bankruptcy in two key ways. Firstly, examine the link between the causes of a company demise that ends in bankruptcy in relation to the experiences of coping and learning. So it would be valuable for researchers to examine how firm owners identify the cause of their failure in relation to how they cope and learn over time. This will provide a cohesive outlook on the impact of a once bankrupted entrepreneur's attributional style. The second way would be to qualitatively investigate the cause of entrepreneurial failure that led to bankruptcy. This will paint a more holistic picture with novel insights about why and how business owners may not have succeeded in the past. And to complement this further, a longitudinal research design to investigate how previously bankrupted entrepreneurs' attributional style may change over time would also be extremely valuable. Our second key overall recommendation around the experiences, implications, and recovery from entrepreneurial venture failure that ends in bankruptcy can be split into three key recommendations. The first is to develop a comprehensive understanding of the experiences of previously bankrupted entrepreneurs who have restarted. Specifically, it would be beneficial to explore the physical and emotional ramifications of bankruptcy and what factors influence entrepreneurial recovery more extensively. Further attention should be paid to the extent to which entrepreneurs' previous business collapse experience has on the development of subsequent firms. The second key recommendations would be to explore the optimal coping mechanisms that can be used to recover from entrepreneurial venture failure, and what is the influence of time on entrepreneurial venture failure. Precisely, Around entrepreneurial venture failure, we still know very little about when does it start, how long does it last for, and what enables certain entrepreneurs to reach a point where they are able to restart. It would also be vital to understand what is the sequencing of these coping measures and what factors really influence this and how exactly do business owners cope. And lastly, we propose that there could be several sampling recommendations for future empirical studies on the entrepreneurial experiences of recovery. Studies could perhaps include business owners, families, and friends to capture a more well-rounded view of how the firm owner deals with the consequences of the venture failure and bankruptcy. And it would also be valuable to include a control group of entrepreneurs who have failed more than once. The last research avenue focuses on learning, opportunity identification, and restart following entrepreneurial failure that ends in bankruptcy. And within this section, we have three key suggestions. The first is to sharpen insights on how learning post-venture failure and bankruptcy helps to develop another firm. It is still unsure at what stage a previously bankrupted entrepreneur manages to start up another firm, and further clarity would also be beneficial around how exactly a firm owner does restart and what factors enable or impede them, and how do they specifically learn. The second key suggestion would be to explore the impact of learning and its relationship with social stigma, financial issues, and the entrepreneur's emotional resources. Further use of cognitive, social, and learning theories and new and alternative theories could be used as a gaze to investigate the entrepreneur's multifaceted experiences. For instance, theories such as anti-fragility and more novel concepts can help shed light to why certain entrepreneurs may bounce back quicker than others. And lastly, methodologically, additional prospective longitudinal studies would provide fresh insights from the entrepreneur's viewpoint of recovery. And further cross-cultural studies on entrepreneurs' re-entry post-bankruptcy will also help to disentangle the impact of culture and the influence of the differences in bankruptcies across the globe. And finally, it would be useful for studies to consist of samples of entrepreneurs who have failed and restarted in the same industry in combination with those who have established a venture in a different industry. In this review, we have aimed to answer two research questions, and we have accordingly made three key contributions. The first is that we have developed an integrative framework which showcases the interconnected stages of how a business owner may restart a firm post-bankruptcy. The second is that our integrative framework contributes by providing invaluable insight into how firm owners can be helped to get back on track, as well as coach firm owners to preempt failure in the first place. And lastly, we propose a more holistic approach should be taken to examine entrepreneurial failure and bankruptcy. We have made theoretical, methodological, and conceptual recommendations. We recognise that our review is not without its limitations. The first is that, albeit we attempted to include all relevant publications, our systematic search was based on three key sources, so there is a chance that we may have missed some research studies. Second, critics may question our lack of focus on the theoretical approaches undertaken by prior research as a key topic of analysis. Yet, given there is a limited number of theoretical stances undertaken by studies to date, this is something that may be applicable in future reviews to be investigated when the literature on entrepreneurial failure that ends in bankruptcy progresses. Despite all of this, we believe our review has identified, synthesized, and analyzed the current research on entrepreneurial failure that results in bankruptcy, and therefore shown how one may bounce back from bankruptcy. We have also suggested several research directions to advance knowledge on this matter and welcome scholars to utilize our recommendations. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation. Feel free to get in touch if you would like to know more. Thank you.